This video is for educational and awareness purposes only. Any examples shared are generalized and edited for privacy. This content reflects personal experience and widely documented trauma and recovery patterns. No accusations are made against any individual, company, or platform. After a romance scam ends, most people expect relief, but what actually comes next is something very different. Today, I want to talk about the aftermath and what real recovery truly looks like. In the last video, I talked about trauma bonding and why victims sometimes defend the scammer even when confronted with proof. Today, I'm moving into what happens after the attachment finally breaks. This is the part that doesn't get enough attention. The grief, the rebuilding, the identity shifts, and the long road back to emotional safety. Part 1. The collapse phase. When the truth finally lands, it doesn't always happen all at once. Sometimes people already suspect something is wrong, but their mind keeps trying to protect them from the full reality. And then one day, something breaks through. A fake photo gets exposed, a story stops making sense, a payment request feels different, or the scammer suddenly disappears. And in that moment, the nervous system can completely crash. I think a lot of people expect victims to simply feel embarrassed and move on, but that's not usually what happens. What often happens is the emotional shock. People can experience panic attacks, physical shaking, loss of appetite, insomnia, brain fog, depression, or even dissociation. Some victims describe it as feeling like reality suddenly stopped feeling real, because emotionally, the relationship was real to them. The attachment was real, the conversations were real, the hope was real. When all that collapses at once, the body reacts like it's surviving trauma because it is. Part 2. Grief for someone who never existed. One of the most confusing parts of recovery is grieving someone who technically never existed. And that sentence alone can make victims feel ashamed. People will say, just move on. It was fake. How could you fall for that? But grief doesn't work that way. The brain doesn't only bond to facts, it bonds to emotional experience. If someone spoke to you every day, if they became part of your routine, if you imagined a future with them, your nervous system attached to that connection. So when the scam ends, victims aren't just grieving a lie. They're grieving the future they imagined, the emotional safety they thought they had, the companionship, the routine, and the version of themselves that felt hopeful again. And honestly, I think that's why this type of grief feels so isolating. Because people often feel like they don't have permission to mourn. But grief is still grief, even when manipulation was involved. Part 3. Shame, humiliation, and silence. After the shock begins to settle, shame usually starts moving in. And shame is one of the most damaging parts of the aftermath, because victims often replay everything in their head. They think, how did I miss the signs? Why did I trust them? What's wrong with me? And many people become terrified of telling anyone. Some hide it from family, some hide it from friends, some never report it at all. Not because they're weak, but because humiliation is incredibly powerful. And unfortunately, public reactions don't always help. Victims are often mocked online, laughed at, and treated like they're unintelligent. But manipulation is not stupidity. These scams are designed around psychology, emotional dependency, isolation, and trust building. And shame keeps victims silent, which allows scammers to keep operating. That's why conversations like this matter. Part 4. Anger, rage, and blame. At some point, grief often turns into anger. And honestly, anger can be an important part of recovery because anger means the mind is starting to recognize the violation. Victims may feel furious at the scammer, the lies, the manipulation, the financial damage, the fake promises, or the amount of time stolen from their life. Some become angry at platforms, some become angry at banks, some become angry at themselves. And self-directed anger can become incredibly destructive. I think many survivors struggle with the thought, I should have known better. But manipulation works precisely because it slowly lowers defenses over time. These scams are built around emotional conditioning, and the anger phase often becomes the beginning of reclaiming personal power. Not revenge, not obsession, but awareness. Part 5: Identity Disorientation. One thing people don't talk about enough is identity loss after a scam. Because these relationships often become emotionally consuming, they affect daily routines, sleep patterns, future planning, financial decisions, and emotional stability. Some victims centered entire parts of their life around the relationship. So when it suddenly disappears, people often feel emotionally untethered. They wake up and think, what do I do now? And that confusion can become overwhelming, especially when the scam affected confidence, independence, or self-worth. Many survivors stop trusting their own judgment, and rebuilding that trust in yourself can take time, but it can come back. Part 6: Hypervigilance and Fear of Connection. After betrayal, many survivors become hyper alert. And this is something I think people misunderstand. They assume victims are simply being paranoid, but hypervigilance is a trauma response. The nervous system starts scanning for danger constantly. People may question everyone, fear dating, avoid emotional closeness, become emotionally numb, or assume every new connection is fake. And honestly, after severe manipulation, that fear makes sense. The brain is trying to prevent the pain from happening again. But over time, living in survival mode becomes exhausting. And healing eventually involves learning how to feel safe again emotionally, financially, and psychologically. Part 7: What real recovery actually looks like. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about healing is the idea that recovery happens in a straight line. It usually doesn't. Some days feel strong, some days feel unbearable. Sometimes people think they're doing better and then a memory hits them out of nowhere. That's normal. Real recovery often looks very ordinary. It looks like checking your bank account without panic, sleeping through the night again, rebuilding routines, setting boundaries, talking honestly about what happened, and slowly reconnecting with yourself. It can also involve therapy, support groups, financial rebuilding, or simply learning how to trust your instincts again. And one of the hardest parts of recovery is self-forgiveness, because many survivors carry enormous guilt. But healing becomes possible when people stop defining themselves by the worst thing that happened to them. Part 8: When healing begins to feel real. Healing usually doesn't arrive all at once. It happens quietly. One day, the shame starts losing its grip. One day, the panic softens. One day, the story becomes easier to tell. And eventually, survivors begin realizing something important. They survived something designed to emotionally destroy them, and they're still here. I think that realization matters because healing is not about pretending the experience never happened. It's about reclaiming your identity after manipulation tried to take it from you. And over time, trust can return, peace can return, stability can return. Not overnight, but gradually. And that gradual healing still counts. In the next video, I'll focus on one of the most painful and confusing behaviors after a romance scam. Why some victims return to the same scammer even after escaping. If you are in the aftermath right now, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not broken. You were manipulated by a system designed to exploit emotional trust. If this video helped you feel seen or understood, please share it and subscribe for continued scam education, recovery guidance, and survivor awareness.